Hello, my name is Jenny Santamaria. I'm a teaching artist based out of Farmingdale, New Jersey. I teach a unique and beautiful art form known as pysanky, or Ukrainian egg decorating. This ancient art is a cherished and beautiful art form, and the message that it carries of peace and hope is even more important today than it's ever been before. The information that I share during the workshops and demonstrations is information that I think the public needs to know today, which is why I wanted this video to be accessible to anyone and everyone. This year, the workshops took on a little bit of a new identity. I had people come from all corners of the world. It was a very multicultural event. People came excited to share stories and celebrate their cultural heritage, while also interested in what's happening in Ukraine and current events. And so this year, I talked a little bit more about the value of the land and its tie to current events. And so this information you're going to be hearing is going to shape the way you think of the Easter egg, which I am sure you will never think of the same way again. I'd like to start first with talking about pysanky. It's a very interesting word. It comes from the word pysanty, which means to write, not to draw, which is interesting because when you look at an image of a deer, you may say that's a deer, right? And you take it literally. But really, if you were to dive a little deeper and see that these images have symbolic meaning, if someone were to hand you a pysanka that they made for you and it has an image of a deer, they created that image for you to have a prosperous year where there is reference to vitality and abundance. So these images have meaning that's elevated to the status of writing. And so in workshops, I use writing and drawing interchangeably. People make batik eggs, art for art's sake, and then there's people that write pysanky that's meant to be given away. So I'd like to start with this book. As you can see, it's one of my favorites because it's falling apart, but I want to unpack what this is all about first by looking at it as a Ukrainian art. Pysanky is a Ukrainian indigenous tradition that goes back very, very far, as you will see. And if you have the pleasure of going to the Ukrainian Museum in New York City in the East Village, you'll see that they have a map on display with a beautiful egg dangling in front of each region. The images and symbols we see on those eggs in front of each region is specific to that region. Interestingly, pysanky is one of the only art forms on earth that's still passed on through the matrilineal line, meaning given away, skill-wise, from mother or grandmother or aunt to daughter or children or even neighborhood. And these images that we see in these different regions have often been passed down for a very long time, maybe thousands of years, by the women in those communities. And also, the whole tradition of creating beautiful eggs that are given away is a tradition that encompasses all of Northern Europe. Pysanky is true to Ukraine, but they also write pysanky in Poland. They spell it with an I. They often work on blown out eggs, which is not of the Ukrainian tradition. And also pysanky in the Polish tradition may also mean many different kinds of egg art. Pysanky spelled with a Y that belongs to the Ukrainian tradition is very specific to Ukraine. These are designs written in wax in the batik style and given away to bring about something beautiful, hopeful, and peaceful to either the people they give it to or to the land and animals they give it to. And also I want to talk a little bit about Easter. The art form today is considered a reference in Christianity. You know, you think of Easter eggs. In the American sense, we think of buying those little kits from the supermarket where you have the tablets and you write with the wax crayon. This is the original version of what that is. And essentially, the art form predates Easter by many, many thousands of years. People are sometimes surprised to learn this. The art form itself was appropriated by Christianity, and it was, to a degree, a pagan practice. That word does have some baggage, though, and pysanky doesn't deserve any baggage, right? It's a peaceful and beautiful art form. And so what is accurate and sympathetic to say is that the practice of writing these eggs belonged to the indigenous of Northern Europe. We had indigenous here in the United States that were forcibly pushed off into reservations. In Northern Europe, there were indigenous too. They lived peacefully on the land and created this tradition, and they eventually moved and disappeared. Essentially, the art form predates the building of the pyramids in Egypt by 2,000 years. That is a really old art form. And so if you think about it that far back, we're talking Neolithic. The art form, I could argue, is the oldest artistic practice on earth. Some people may argue and say, well, what about drumming? What about dancing? Those are Neolithic art forms. And yes, that may be true, but I don't know too many drumming patterns or dances that have been passed on from mother to daughter all this time and is still true to form from that far back. Specifically, the Trypillian culture of Northern Europe created this tradition. These people are very interesting, and I really encourage you to do more research about Trypillia. The Trypillian culture was all of Ukraine, which is twice the size of Texas, and some of the neighboring countries. And essentially, this culture lived in an egalitarian society, meaning that men and women were treated as equals, with a particular reverence for women, because we see pottery left behind from these sites and little figurines that suggest that maybe there was sort of an interest, an appreciation, perhaps for the fact that women could carry life. The pottery left behind represent, in many cases, women's bodies. The images we see on the pottery look awfully similar to the eggs that are designed today. Trypillia doesn't suggest, when we look at the artifacts from this time, there's no suggestion that these people experienced war. They didn't seem to have weapons. They lived peacefully, and they lived on the land. I'd like to talk a little bit about the land of Ukraine. If you were to take your hand and really dig it into the soil in Ukraine, you would pull up black soil. It is incredibly rich and nutritious. And that being said, it is nicknamed the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine feeds millions of people around the world. The Middle East depends on Ukraine and its ability to grow wheat and barley. You could grow anything there. It's incredible. If you pay attention to what's happening in the news, you will hear that the world leaders are very interested in minerals at Ukraine. So that doesn't surprise me. Ukraine's history, which is very long, suggests that there may have always been a tumultuous relationship with its neighbors because of how rich and special this land is. Being you could grow anything in it. There's coal, iron, minerals, uranium, lithium. So the world is watching in that way. But also the people that live in Ukraine have indigenous roots. These are peoples that were connected to the land. Their ancestors were connected to the land, and they are still to this day. Something interesting I've learned in recent years is that it's believed, and I've looked it up, that there seems to be some fact to support that the Ukrainian people were the first ones to take honey and wax from the hives without killing the bees. They waited until the winter was over, when the bees had eaten and were then enjoying the spring, and they could take the honey in a sustainable way. They also may have very well domesticated chickens. Although that originated in China, there is some suggestion they may have also known how to do this. These ancient peoples, being so connected to the land, were very connected to the chicken, which I really want to talk about a little bit too, because there's a miraculous nature to the chicken. So when I teach in New Jersey, we're a little disconnected from where we get food from here in New Jersey. And I'll ask the question, do we know how we manipulate the chickens to lay eggs all year round? Sometimes people look at me like, you're kidding me, they don't lay eggs all year round? No, they're birds. They'll stop in the winter, you know? And so we trick them by putting lights in their coops when they sleep, and so they are tricked into laying eggs all year round. In ancient times, I bet you ancient peoples knew this. And maybe they kept chickens simply because you could eat them in the winter, but I bet they knew that if you kept a chicken all the way through winter, you would get a very special gift, and that gift would be very important to these people. I'd like to hold it up for you. The humble little egg. We take for granted the symbol of hope. In Northern Europe, people survived the winter, and if you got this, it meant that the winter is almost over. It was a miracle. That miracle might be lost on us in American society because we can get food anytime we want. right? But really, this would have been such a miracle and a gift, and it's no wonder that Catholicism appropriated this tradition and looked at this to reference the resurrection. He has risen, right? So the egg in itself is a miraculous thing, from a miraculous bird that all of a sudden lays a food source and a symbol of regeneration. This is a very special image, you see. It's the first design I was ever taught to do when I was young, and it is considered to be the oldest visual representation of love on earth. And it has survived so much war, religious takeover, boundaries being written and rewritten, people having to move, and even most of all, communism. In a communist state, you're not allowed to worship or express spirituality. And the ancient peoples wrote this image thousands of years ago, probably referencing the life force of the sun, but also in today's time, referencing God's love. To receive an egg with this design is to say, I want you to have the most abundant, wonderful year. And essentially, when I teach the workshops, I express that this image is a very powerful one. That suggests the resiliency of the Ukrainian people. It suggests that people were at one time very connected to the land and the seasons, and that these images stay true. They survive because of the very courageous women who chose to share them in spite of all the hardships in their way. And so the miraculous egg, of course, would have an image so powerful on it. I have heard that it is tradition to make somewhere between 50 to 150 eggs in the spring season, and all of them are given away. It's an incredible labor of love. And essentially, if you were to receive one, it's to suggest that something beautiful and positive has been bestowed onto. And so there are other traditions around the eggs. There are people that write pysanky to put them under the bee boxes to ensure more honey, wax, and to protect the hives. There are people that write a pysanka and put them back in the chicken coop, which must be very confusing for the chickens, but it's to thank them and to inspire more eggs and health for the chickens. And then, of course, you would have them blessed by your priest. You'd leave one at a grave site, give them to your children, your husbands, your neighbors. And so this tradition of giving away is really something we see throughout all of Northern Europe and Canada. The eggs are a big deal in Canada too. Many people left Northern Europe during the World Wars to move to Canada, and here in New England, where I teach so frequently. I'd like to share a little bit of folklore with you around these eggs. The first one is around the origin story of pysanky. And there's a lot of great stories. It was a beautiful fall day, and all the people in their Ukrainian village, which, by the way, were shaped in circles in ancient times, shaped like an egg. These people were all enjoying a beautiful fall day, and the birds were singing, and all of a sudden, the winter swept in. People rushed into their homes, and they could see that the birds were falling from the sky and landing on the ground. They didn't have a chance to fly somewhere warmer, And so the people left the comfort of their homes to gather all the birds and bring them in to take care of them. In those days, you prepared all year for the winter, and so it was probably a tremendous hardship to take care of all these animals unexpectedly. But they took care of the birds anyway. All winter long, the people and their children and the birds ate all the same foods. And essentially, when the spring came, all the people let the birds free, and the birds returned the next day to lay beautiful decorated eggs for all the people that took care of them. As to say, you don't just take care of yourself, you take care of everyone. You take care of the land and the animals and everyone. I love those types of stories. I think it paints the picture a little bit about how connected the Ukrainian people are with that environment that so many people seem to be interested in. And lastly, I'll end with a very important piece of folklore that many people believe and share today about a monster chained to a cliff in the Carpathian Mountains. There's a monster that's chained that's the embodiment of evil. So if you want to use your imagination, think of something a little frightening and maybe satanic or something. Essentially, this monster has a lot of friends and scouts that fly around the world to see how many beautiful pysanky have been made this spring. If the scouts come back and report that there was more pysanky than last year, the chains are tightened on the monster, so peace and harmony have a chance to blanket the earth. But if the scouts come back, say there's less decorated eggs than last year, the monster's chains are loosened, so it is freed to blanket the world in war, suffering, and confusion. This is why this information is important to hear during these very troubling times. There are people that choose to stay in their homes in Ukraine to write pysanky as they always did. But also, if the folklore is true, it's interesting to think that maybe it's through the arts and through a sense of shared responsibility for each other and for our land that maybe we would be able to get a glimpse of what it would be like to have peace.